welcome. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Or, I might show up at your door. I'm just here to share some creepy stories, so sit back and enjoy. Disclaimer: the content presented in the video is purely for entertainment purposes only. The theories and stories discussed in this video are speculative and are not supported by any evidence or proof. Viewer discretion is advised. Emergency log. Classification: restricted. Agent: Idris Chun, Field Investigator number 4471. Location: Salem, Massachusetts. Date: October 28, 2024, 14:30 Eastern Standard Time. Assignment: Historical Anomaly Investigation Case #SAL 1692. Standard deployment to Salem for what command classified as a routine historical electromagnetic disturbance. Nothing routine about this place, though. Been here 6 times in the past decade, always the same story. Tourist traps, witch museums, locals cashing in on 3-century-old hysteria. But the readings don't lie. My EMF detector started screaming the moment I crossed the city limits. Not the usual background hum you get near old burial grounds. This was different, pulsing, like something underground was breathing. Set up base camp at the Hawthorne Hotel. Ironic, considering Hawthorne wrote about Salem's ghosts. The desk clerk, a kid with too many piercings and a Salem State College t-shirt, kept glancing at my equipment case. "You one of those ghost hunters?" she asked. I showed her my Department of Historical Preservation credentials. Close enough to the truth. First sweep took me through downtown Salem, starting at the Witch House. EMF readings spiked near Gallows Hill Park, exactly where the city relocated the memorial after discovering they'd been commemorating the wrong execution site for decades. Bureaucratic irony. Even in death, Salem can't get its victims' stories straight. That's when I saw them. Faint scratches in the cobblestones near the memorial. At first glance, looked like normal wear patterns from foot traffic and weather. But something made me kneel down, run my fingers along the grooves. The stone was warm. In late October, in Massachusetts, the scratches formed symbols. Not random, deliberate. Geometric patterns that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. My digital camera couldn't capture them properly. Every photo came out as normal weathered stone. Called Nolan during my lunch break. My younger brother's been giving historical tours in Salem for 3 years now, ever since he graduated with his history degree and couldn't find anything better. He knows every ghost story, every conspiracy theory, every piece of local folklore the tourists eat up. "Idris, didn't know you were in town. Let me guess. More government research you can't talk about, something like that. Question for you. Have you noticed anything unusual around the memorial sites recently? Tourists reporting strange experiences. Locals acting different." Long pause. "Funny you should ask. Had this weird tour group last week. 5 people all claiming they'd been having the same dream. Something about voices calling from under the street. And Mrs. Pemberton from the Historical Society mentioned the groundskeepers have been complaining about warm spots in the grass near Gallows Hill. Warm spots, like the stones. Spent the afternoon expanding my search radius. Found more symbols carved into various surfaces throughout downtown sidewalks, building foundations, even worked into the mortar between bricks on Federal Street. Always faint, always warm to the touch, always impossible to photograph. Pattern was becoming clear. The symbols formed a rough circle around Salem's historic district, with the heaviest concentration near sites connected to the 1692 witch trials. Rebecca Nurse Homestead, the old burying point, Proctor's Ledge. Every location associated with the executions showed evidence of the markings. Standard protocol requires immediate reporting of Class 3 anomalies. But something held me back. Maybe it was professional curiosity. Maybe it was the way the symbols seemed to pulse in my peripheral vision, like they were trying to communicate. Decided to conduct night surveillance before filing my preliminary report. Returned to Gallows Hill at 2300 hours. Salem after dark is different. The tourist crowds disappear, leaving only shadows and the weight of 300 years of guilt. Set up thermal imaging equipment and EMF scanners in a perimeter around the memorial. At 2347, the readings spiked. At 2348, the symbols began to glow, not bright, just enough to be visible in the darkness. A soft, pulsing blue-white light that seemed to emanate from within the stone itself. The thermal camera registered no heat signature, but I could feel warmth radiating up through the soles of my boots. The runes, because that's what they were, I realized, not random scratches but deliberate runic inscriptions, pulsed in sequence, starting from the memorial and spreading outward through the downtown area like ripples on water. Each symbol flashed for exactly 3 seconds before fading, only to pulse again 60 seconds later. Like a heartbeat, I managed to sketch several of the clearer symbols in my field notebook, though my hand kept shaking. The geometric patterns hurt to look at directly, creating optical illusions that made my eyes water. But in those brief moments when they blazed with inner light, I could see they weren't carved into the stone. They were growing from within it. My radio crackled with interference. Command's standard check-in signal dissolved into static filled with what sounded almost like whispers. Couldn't make out words, but the cadence was wrong for random electromagnetic interference. Too rhythmic, too intentional. At midnight exactly, the pulsing stopped. The symbols faded back to invisible scratches in weathered stone. EMF readings returned to background levels. My thermal camera showed nothing but cooling asphalt and October night air, but the whispers in the radio static continued for another 17 minutes. Anomalous electromagnetic activity confirmed. Visual manifestations documented but not photographable. Recommend immediate escalation to Level 2 investigation team. Request backup from Agent Blackwood. His experience with historical supernatural manifestations makes him ideal for this assignment. Personal note: something is waking up in Salem. Something that's been sleeping for 3 centuries. The runes pulse like a heartbeat beneath the streetlights, and I have the growing certainty that we're not here to investigate a historical curiosity. We're here because Salem's dead are getting restless. End log. Classified addendum. Eyes only. Agent Chen's readings correlate with predictive models from Project. Historical correction. Activating containment protocols. Dispatch Agent Blackwood immediately. D. Vale, Operations Director. Emergency log. Classification. Restricted. Agent Idris Chun, Field Investigator number 4471. Location: Salem, Massachusetts. Date: October 29th, 2024, 7:15 Eastern Standard Time. Assignment: Historical Anomaly Investigation Case #SAL 1692. Status: Escalating. Didn't sleep last night. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see those runes pulsing behind my eyelids. Blue-white light spelling out words in languages that felt familiar but wrong, like trying to remember a song you heard in a fever dream. The hotel clerk looked like hell when I came down for coffee. Dark circles under her eyes, hands shaking as she refilled the coffee station. Bad night? I asked. Weird dreams, she muttered. Keep dreaming about burning, but not normal fire. Cold fire that screams. She glanced up at me, and I saw genuine fear in her eyes. You ever have dreams where you're someone else? Living someone else's death. I've had those dreams. Part of the job when you investigate sites with violent histories. Psychic residue, the textbooks call it. But this felt different. Conducted dawn patrol through downtown Salem. The symbols were still there, still warm to the touch. But something had changed overnight. They were darker now, etched deeper into the stone. And there were more of them. New runes had appeared along Essex Street, carved into the sidewalk in front of the Peabody Essex Museum. The pattern was expanding, spreading outward from the memorial sites like some kind of infection. Each new symbol was more complex than the last, incorporating geometric designs that hurt to study for too long. My EMF readings were off the charts. Whatever was generating this electromagnetic disturbance was getting stronger. Called Nolan at 9 o'clock. He sounded as exhausted as I felt. Idris, thank God. I was about to call you. Something's happening in Salem, and I don't think it's anything the tourism board's going to want to advertise. Tell me, had 7 people on yesterday's afternoon tour. All of them complained about nightmares after visiting the memorial sites. But here's the weird part, they all described the same dream. Word for word. They're standing in a colonial courthouse, watching someone being sentenced to death, but they can't see the defendant's face. And there's this voice calling out names in some language that sounds like Latin but isn't. The same voice I'd heard in the radio static. Any chance you could send me a list of those names? Already wrote them down. But Idris, I recognized some of them. They're not random. They're the names of the executed witches, but pronounced wrong. Like someone was trying to say them from memory and getting the sounds all mixed up. Met Nolan for lunch at Turner's Seafood. My brother looks like a younger, more optimistic version of me. Same dark hair, same stubborn jawline, but without the weight of classified government knowledge pressing down on his shoulders. He was carrying a leather portfolio stuffed with historical documents and tour notes. I've been doing research since we talked, he said, sliding a folder across the table, cross-referencing the nightmare reports with historical records from the witch trials. Look at this. The documents were photocopies from the Essex County Courthouse archives. Trial transcripts from 1692, written in the cramped handwriting of colonial clerks. But someone had highlighted specific passages in each document. Passages that mentioned strange marks appearing on courthouse walls during the trials. According to the court records, symbols kept appearing overnight on the walls of the courthouse where they held the hearings. The judges dismissed them as pranks or devil's work, but look at the descriptions. I read the highlighted text aloud. Marks of curious design did manifest upon the stone walls, as if carved by invisible hands. The marks did glow with unholy light when observed in darkness, and did multiply nightly despite attempts to scrub them clean. The same runes. 300 years ago. There's more, Nolan continued, pulling out another document. This is from Reverend Paris's personal journal. Never made it into the official court records because it was too fantastical for legal documentation. The journal entry was dated September 15th, 1692. The accused Sarah Good did speak strangely before her execution, uttering words in no Christian tongue. As she spoke, the very ground beneath Gallows Hill did glow with marks unknown to Scripture. I fear we have awakened something that should have remained sleeping. The marks spread each night, and with them come dreams of burning that plague both accuser and accused alike. Nolan, where did you get this? Mrs. Pemberton from the Historical Society. She's been collecting unpublished documents for decades, most of it stored in the basement of the old town hall. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. But here's what's really bothering me. She said these documents were sealed in a safety deposit box until last week. Someone requested access to them. Someone with federal credentials. My blood went cold. What kind of federal credentials? Department of Historical Preservation. Same department you work for. Before I could respond, my secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message. Agent Blackwood arriving 1500 hours. Prepare full briefing. Classification elevated to level 2. Do not discuss with civilians. DV, Agent Fenric Blackwood, my former mentor, now senior investigator specializing in what command euphemistically calls historical supernatural manifestations. If they were sending Fenric, the situation was worse than I'd thought. I have to go, I told Nolan, gathering up the documents. But I need you to promise me something. Stay away from the memorial sites after dark. Don't take any tours near Gallows Hill until I give you the all-clear. Idris, what's really going on? This isn't just some government research project, is it? I wanted to tell him the truth, that his Department of Historical Preservation brother actually works for a classified organization that monitors supernatural threats. That Salem's tourist attractions are built on a foundation of genuine occult horror. That something buried for 3 centuries was clawing its way back to the surface. Instead, I said, just trust me. Keep people away from the memorial sites. Return to base camp to prepare for Fenric's arrival. The runes outside my hotel window were glowing again, even in broad daylight. Faint but visible if you knew where to look. The pattern now extended from Federal Street to Chestnut Street, forming what looked like the outline of a massive circle centered on downtown Salem. My EMF equipment was registering readings I'd never seen before. Not just electromagnetic disturbance, something that shouldn't exist according to conventional physics. Energy signatures that seemed to pulse with intention. At 1447, every electronic device in Salem went dead for exactly 13 seconds. At 1448, the runes blazed with cold fire that could be seen from space. At 1500 hours, Agent Blackwood arrived with a file marked "Eyes Only" and the expression of a man who'd seen this before. "Hello, Idris. We need to talk." Preliminary assessment update. Historical precedent confirmed. Pattern recognition indicates deliberate supernatural manifestation following 332-year cycle. Recommend immediate civilian evacuation of affected areas. Personal note: the witch trial victims' names glow in languages that predate Latin. Whatever they're trying to say, it's getting louder, and I have the terrible feeling that someone with federal credentials has been helping them find their voice. End log. Classified addendum. Eyes Only. Project. Historical correction entering Phase 2. Agent Blackwood has full operational authority. Civilian information leak contained through Chun family asset. Continue monitoring. D. Vale, Operations Director. Emergency log. Classification. Restricted. Agent Idris Chun, Field Investigator number 4471. Location: Salem, Massachusetts. Date: October 29, 2024, 1930 Eastern Standard Time. Assignment: Historical Anomaly Investigation Case #SAL 1692. Status: Critical Escalation. Supervisor: Agent F. Blackwood, Senior Investigator. Agent Blackwood arrived with 3 locked cases and 20 years of experience written in the lines around his eyes. Fenric's always been direct. No small talk, no reassurances. Just facts and protocols. "Show me everything," he said before he'd even set down his equipment. Spent 2 hours walking him through the manifestation sites. He didn't react to the warm stones or the pulsing EMF readings. Didn't even flinch when the runes began their daylight glow near the memorial. Just took photographs with specialized equipment I'd never seen before. Made notes in a leather journal that looked older than the witch trials themselves. "Patterns accelerating," he said finally. "Estimate 48 hours before full manifestation." Full manifestation of what? Later. First, we investigate the local variables. He pulled out a tablet displaying satellite imagery of Salem overlaid with our EMF readings. Someone's been preparing this for months. The runes didn't just appear. They were carved according to a specific ritual pattern. We need to find who's been doing the carving. That's when he showed me the classified file. The Salem Historical Preservation Society, founded in 1993 by Dr. Silas Thorne, Professor Emeritus of Colonial American History at Salem State University. On the surface, a legitimate organization dedicated to maintaining Salem's historical sites and educating the public about the witch trials. But the financial records told a different story. Thorne's been purchasing property throughout Salem for 30 years, Fenric explained, spreading documents across my hotel room desk. Always sites connected to the 1692 executions. He now owns or has access to every location where the accused witches were interrogated, tried, or killed. The property map showed Thorne's acquisitions in red. Combined with our EMF readings, the pattern was undeniable. Every supernatural hotspot fell within his controlled territory. The timing isn't coincidental, Fenric continued. Thorne's been waiting for the 332-year anniversary. In certain occult traditions, that's when the spiritual boundary between past and present becomes permeable. You're saying he's trying to contact the dead? I'm saying he's trying to resurrect them. We approached the Salem Historical Preservation Society building at 2000 hours. A converted colonial house on Chestnut Street, unremarkable except for the fact that my EMF detector started screaming when we got within 50 feet of the front door. The building was dark, but Fenrich's thermal imaging showed heat signatures in the basement. 7 people arranged in a circle around what appeared to be a table or altar. Standard infiltration protocol, Fenrich whispered. Document everything. Avoid direct confrontation. We entered through a rear window. The house felt wrong. Too warm, too quiet, with an underlying electrical hum that made my teeth ache. The walls were covered with historical photographs from the witch trials, but someone had drawn additional symbols around each image in what looked like red ink or blood. The basement stairs creaked despite our efforts at stealth. We could hear voices below, not conversation, but synchronized chanting in a language that sounded like Latin played backwards. From the bottom of the stairs, we had a clear view of the ritual space. 7 people in colonial-era clothing stood around a table covered with documents and artifacts. At the center of the table sat a large book bound in what looked like human skin, open to pages covered with the same runic symbols we'd been finding throughout Salem. Dr. Silas Thorne stood at the head of the table, tall, gaunt, with the kind of intense eyes that belonged to someone who'd stared too long into dark places. He was reading from the book, speaking names I recognized from Nolan's research. Bridget Bishop, executed June 10, 1692. As he spoke each name, one of the runes carved into the basement floor began to glow. Sarah Good, executed July 19, 1692. Another rune flared with cold light. Rebecca Nurse, executed July 19, 1692. The chanting grew louder. The people around the table weren't just cult members. They were mediums, channeling something that made the air itself feel thick and hostile. Fenrich was recording everything on his specialized camera. But when I looked at him, his expression wasn't the professional detachment I expected. There was something else there. Recognition. Like he'd seen this before. Susanna Martin, executed July 19, 1692. The name hit me like a physical blow. Not because I recognized it from the historical records, but because I suddenly remembered where I'd heard it before. In the radio static 2 nights ago. The whispers that had continued for 17 minutes after the runic pulse stopped. Martha Corey, executed September 22, 1692. Fenrich grabbed my arm. We need to go. Now. But it was too late. Thorne's head snapped up, his eyes fixing on our position at the bottom of the stairs. Agents Chun and Blackwood, he said calmly. Right on schedule. He knew our names. He knew we were coming. The Preservation Society preserves nothing, Thorne continued, closing the book. We're archaeologists of injustice, gentlemen. And after 332 years, we're finally ready to correct the historical record. The cult members turned to face us. In the glow of the basement runes, I could see their faces clearly for the first time. They weren't just people in costume. They were channeling the executed witches, their features shifting and blurring like photographs double exposed. You see, the trials weren't about witchcraft, Thorne said. They were about power, about silencing voices that threatened the established order. But death doesn't silence truth, it amplifies it. The runes around the basement began pulsing faster, their light growing brighter. Every symbol your organization has been tracking, every manifestation you've documented. It's all been preparation for tonight, the 332nd anniversary of the last execution. The night when the boundary between past and present dissolves completely. Fenrich was backing toward the stairs, but the cult members moved to block our retreat. The dead of Salem have been waiting, Thorne continued, waiting for justice, waiting for vengeance, and waiting for the right people to help them find it. He smiled, and in that smile I saw the terrible truth. Your organization has been so helpful, Agent Blackwood. 20 years of feeding us information, helping us locate the correct ritual sites, ensuring we had access to the right historical documents. Did you really think we wouldn't notice your contributions? I turned to stare at Fenric. His face had gone pale, but he wasn't denying it. Fenric, it's complicated, Idris. The witch trials were a genocide, Thorn said. 20 innocent people murdered for the crime of being different. And for 332 years, Salem has profited from their deaths. Ghost tours, witch museums, Halloween celebrations, all built on the graves of the innocent. The runes were blazing now, filling the basement with cold fire. Tonight, we give them back their voices. Tonight, we let the dead speak. Fenric pulled out his sidearm, but he wasn't pointing it at the cult members. He was pointing it at me. I'm sorry, Idris, but some injustices are too great to ignore. Field assessment, investigation compromised. Agent Blackwood's loyalty questionable. Cult leader Thorn has been manipulating our intelligence for decades. Supernatural manifestation imminent. The Preservation Society preserves nothing. They're awakening something that should have stayed dead. And my mentor just became my enemy. End log. Classified addendum. Priority alert. Agent Blackwood's cover maintained. Phase 3 authorization confirmed. Civilian casualties acceptable within established parameters. D. Vale, Operations Director. Emergency log. Classification. Restricted. Agent Idris Chun. Field Investigator number 4471. Location. Salem, Massachusetts. Date. October 29, 2024. 21:45 Eastern Standard Time. Assignment. Historical Anomaly Investigation Case #SAL 1692. Status. Agent compromised. Requesting immediate extraction. Fenric's gun stayed trained on me for exactly 7 seconds. Long enough for me to see 20 years of partnership dissolve into betrayal. Long enough to understand that everything I thought I knew about this assignment was a lie. Then the basement lights went out. In the darkness, the runic symbols blazed like stars, casting everything in cold blue fire. The cult members' chanting rose to a crescendo, and I felt something vast and hungry stir beneath Salem's foundations. I moved during the confusion, diving behind an old filing cabinet as Fenric's first shot shattered the concrete wall where my head had been. Training kicked in: roll, seek cover, assess threats. But my mind was reeling from the betrayal. 20 years, Fenric, I shouted over the chanting. 20 years we've worked together. 20 years I've been correcting historical injustices, he replied, his voice coming from somewhere near the stairs. The organization doesn't investigate supernatural threats, Idris. We create them. We harness them. We weaponize them. Thorn's voice cut through our argument like a blade. Enough. The ritual requires focus. Agent Blackwood, contain your former partner. We have work to finish. My secure phone buzzed with an incoming call. Command. I answered while keeping low behind the filing cabinet. Agent Chun, this is Director Vale. Report your status immediately. Sir, Agent Blackwood has compromised the mission. He's working with the cult. They've been planning this for Agent Chen. Vale's voice was cold, professional. You are to evacuate Salem immediately. All civilian personnel within a 5-mile radius are to be removed within the next 6 hours. Sir, what about stopping the ritual? The ritual is not to be stopped. It is to be contained. The words hit me like ice water. Sir, Operation Historical Correction is entering Phase 3. Your brother has been contacted and is en route to the evacuation center. Do not attempt to interfere with Dr. Thorne's work. The call ended. I stared at the phone, understanding flooding through me like poison. The organization wasn't here to stop a supernatural threat. We were here to manage it, to study it, to harvest whatever power the cult managed to unleash. My brother was in danger, and my own agency was using him as bait. Gunfire erupted across the basement as Fenric tried to flush me out of cover. But the cult members were losing control of their ritual. The chanting had become screaming, and the runes were pulsing so fast they looked like strobing emergency lights. "The boundary is tearing," Thorn shouted. "They're coming through ahead of schedule." The air in the basement began to shimmer. Through the distortion, I could see shapes moving, figures in colonial dress, faces twisted with 3 centuries of rage. The executed witches weren't just being contacted, they were being resurrected. I broke from cover and ran for the stairs. Fenric's second shot missed, but barely. Behind me, the cult members were screaming in languages that predated English, their voices blending with something else. The voices of the dead, speaking through living throats, made it to the main floor as every window in the building exploded outward. The house shook like it was tearing itself apart from the inside. Through the broken windows, I could see downtown Salem lighting up like a circuit board as the runic network activated all at once. Every street, every sidewalk, every foundation stone was glowing with cold fire. Called Nolan while running for my rental car. He answered on the first ring. "Idris? Thank God. Something insane is happening here. The whole downtown area is." "Where are you right now?" "At the evacuation center they set up at Salem State. Some federal agents came by the house about an hour ago, said there was a gas leak emergency." "But Idris, this isn't about gas leaks. The sky is wrong. It's the wrong color, and there are shadows moving that don't match anything casting them. Stay where you are. Don't trust anyone in a federal uniform. I'm coming to get you." "What's really going on?" I looked back at the Historical Preservation Society building. The entire structure was glowing now, and things that shouldn't exist were pouring out of the basement windows. Figures in colonial dress, but wrong, translucent, burning with cold fire, their faces locked in expressions of eternal rage. "Salem's dead are coming home," I said. Drove through downtown Salem at speeds that would have gotten me arrested under normal circumstances. But nothing about tonight was normal. The runic network was fully active now, every symbol blazing with supernatural energy. Street lights were exploding in showers of sparks. Car alarms were screaming in harmonics that hurt to hear. And everywhere the dead were walking, not zombies, something worse. The spirits of the executed witches, given form by centuries of accumulated injustice. They moved through the streets like living flames, and wherever they passed, the modern world began to dissolve. Storefronts flickered between present and past. The Starbucks on Federal Street became a colonial blacksmith shop. The parking meters transformed into wooden pillories. Salem was being pulled backward through time, returning to its 1692 configuration. My radio crackled with emergency broadcasts. "All units, we have multiple civilian casualties downtown. Victims appear to have aged rapidly, some showing signs of burns despite no evidence of fire. This is Salem Fire Department. We've got reports of colonial-era buildings materializing on Essex Street." How do I even write this up? Federal agencies are requesting immediate cessation of all emergency response. Repeat, do not approach downtown Salem. That last one was Vale's voice, transmitted on emergency frequencies. The organization was locking down Salem, keeping local authorities away while the supernatural chaos unfolded. Reached Salem State University at 22:30. The evacuation center was a nightmare of confusion and terror. Hundreds of civilians clustered in the gymnasium, all of them refugees from downtown. But the federal agents manning the perimeter weren't there to protect them. They were there to contain them. Found Nolan near the basketball hoops, helping calm down a family with young children. He looked up as I approached, relief flooding his face. "Idris, these federal guys won't tell us anything. They just keep saying we need to wait for the all clear, but nobody knows what we're waiting for. And the ones in charge keep taking people aside for interviews, but those people don't come back." I grabbed his arm. "We're leaving. Now, I can't just abandon these people. The people interviewing evacuees aren't trying to help them. They're identifying potential witnesses. Anyone who saw too much downtown is being permanently silenced." Nolan's face went pale. "My God, What kind of government operation is this? The kind that sacrifices civilians to study supernatural weapons. We made it halfway to the exit before Agent Vale appeared, flanked by two men I didn't recognize. Black suits, expressionless faces, the kind of federal muscle that handled the organization's wet work. Agent Chun, I thought I ordered you to evacuate. I'm following orders, sir. Extracting my civilian asset. Your brother isn't an asset. He's a witness, and witnesses to historical correction events require debriefing. The two muscle-bound agents moved to flank Nolan. My brother looked between them and me, understanding finally dawning in his eyes. Idris? What's he talking about? Vale smiled, the cold, calculating expression of a man who'd ordered too many necessary evils. Your brother has been instrumental in our research, Agent Chun. His historical knowledge, his access to local archives, his connection to you, all very valuable. But now that Phase 3 is complete, his usefulness has ended. One of the agents reached for Nolan's arm. I broke his wrist and drew my sidearm in the same motion. Protocol demands sacrifice, I said, pointing my gun at Vale's chest. The question is, whose? Field assessment. Organization compromised at highest levels. Salem supernatural event orchestrated, not investigated. Civilian populations expendable. Trust no one in federal uniform. My own agency is the enemy, and my brother is the target. Time to go rogue. End log. Classified addendum. Priority alert. Agent Chun has gone rogue. Civilian asset compromised. Authorized lethal force. Historical correction Phase 3 proceeding as planned. D. Vale, Operations Director. Emergency log. Classification. Eyes only. Agent Idris Chun. Field Investigator number 4471. Location: Salem, Massachusetts. Date: October 30th, 2024, 23:58 Eastern Standard Time. Assignment: Mission compromised. Operating without authorization. Status: Agent Rogue. Family Protection Protocol active. Vale's body hit the gymnasium floor with a wet thud. The two muscle-bound agents reached for their weapons, but Nolan was faster than I expected. 20 years of historical reenactment had given him good reflexes. He grabbed a folding chair and took out the first agent's knees while I put 2 rounds center mass in the second. Jesus Christ, Idris. You just killed federal agents. They weren't federal agents. They were executioners. I grabbed Vale's secure phone as it buzzed with incoming alerts. The screen showed a countdown timer, 2 minutes and 17 seconds and falling. And we have 2 minutes before something called Convergence Protocol activates. The phone's alert feed was a nightmare of updates. Historical Correction Phase 3 active. Runic Network, 97% synchronization. Temporal displacement, accelerating. Civilian casualties, acceptable parameters.
Spectral manifestation, exceeded projection.
Outside the gymnasium, the air raid sirens started wailing. What's Convergence Protocol? Nolan asked, helping me drag the bodies behind the basketball hoops. I don't know, but the timer hit 0. Every light in Salem went out simultaneously. Then the screaming started. Not human screaming, though there was plenty of that. This was the sound of reality tearing. Through the gymnasium windows, we could see downtown Salem writhing like a living thing. Buildings flickered between present and past so rapidly they looked like they were vibrating. Street lights became torches. Asphalt became cobblestone. Cars became horse-drawn carriages. And walking through it all, the dead of 1692. But they weren't alone anymore. Idris. Nolan's voice was barely a whisper. Look at the sky. Above Salem, the night sky was burning. Not with fire, with cold, blue-white flame that cast everything in stark, unnatural light. And descending through that burning sky were shapes that had never walked the earth in any century. Things with too many limbs and faces that hurt to look at directly. Entities that fed on injustice and grew fat on centuries of accumulated rage. The cult hadn't just summoned the spirits of Salem's executed witches. They'd opened a doorway for everything that hungers for revenge against the living. Vale's phone buzzed with a final transmission. Harvest protocol initiated. Spectral energy collection commencing. Estimated yield. Sufficient for weapons program phase 4. I understood then. The organization hadn't been trying to stop supernatural threats. They'd been farming them, creating conditions for maximum supernatural manifestation, then harvesting the resulting energy for their own purposes. Salem was just the latest crop, and my brother and I were fertilizer. We need to get to downtown, I said, pocketing Vale's phone and checking my ammunition. To Gallows Hill. Are you insane? That's where all the... Nolan gestured at the nightmare unfolding beyond the windows. Where all the dead things are. It's also where Silas Thorne is conducting his ritual. And unless someone stops him, this spreads beyond Salem. The phone showed targeting data for Boston, New York, Philadelphia. They're planning to do this to every historically significant city on the East Coast. Nolan stared at me. How do you stop something like this? I don't know. But I know someone who might. Cut through the back exit while the remaining evacuation staff dealt with panicking civilians. Vale's agents were gone, either fled or recalled to contain the downtown chaos. Outside, Salem State's campus was transforming. The modern buildings flickered like bad television reception, occasionally revealing colonial-era structures underneath. Students ran screaming across lawns that shifted between manicured grass and wild forest. Some of them were aging rapidly, the same effect I'd seen downtown when people touched the ruins. But others were changing in different ways. Their clothes became colonial dress. Their faces took on expressions of religious fervor or desperate fear. They were being pulled into Salem's past, becoming part of the witch trials. The temporal displacement is accelerating, I said, grabbing Nolan's arm as a group of Puritan-dressed figures ran past us, their faces locked in expressions of righteous fury. We need to reach Gallows Hill before. A voice cut through the chaos. Familiar. Terrible. Agent Chen. Fenric stepped out from behind an overturned campus security vehicle, his suit torn and bloody, his eyes reflecting the cold fire that burned above Salem. But he wasn't alone. Beside him stood a figure in colonial dress, a woman with rope burns around her neck and hate in her dead eyes. I told you not to interfere, Fenric said. His voice had a double tone now, as if someone else was speaking through him. The historical correction serves justice. The executed demand their due. The dead woman beside him spoke with a voice like wind through gravestones. 3 centuries we have waited. 3 centuries of rage and injustice. Now the guilty will burn as we burned. The guilty are already dead, Bridget, I said, recognizing her from Nolan's historical research. Bridget Bishop, the first woman executed during the Salem witch trials. The people who killed you died centuries ago, but their city lives. Their descendants prosper. Their story is told as victory over superstition. Her form flickered, becoming more solid, more present. We will correct the record. Salem will burn until only truth remains. Fenric raised his gun. I'm sorry, Idris, but some sacrifices serve a greater purpose. The shot that rang out wasn't his. Daxton Vale stumbled out of the gymnasium behind us, blood running from a head wound, a smoking pistol in his hand. Fenric collapsed, a hole punched through his chest. Director, I kept my own weapon trained on him. Thought you were dead. Takes more than 2 bullets to kill a 30-year organization veteran. Vale wiped blood from his eyes. But your rogue status stands. This operation is bigger than Salem, Chun. Bigger than your brother. Bigger than a few hundred civilian casualties. What's the end game? Weaponized supernatural energy. Every major conflict in human history has been won by superior firepower. Guns, explosives, nuclear weapons. The next war will be fought with controlled supernatural forces. Salem is our proof of concept. Bridget Bishop's spirit was growing more solid by the moment, fed by the rage and terror permeating the city. Around us, more colonial-era figures were materializing. both the executed and their executioners locked in eternal conflict. And if Salem burns, then we know the weapon works. Vale's smile was the coldest thing I'd ever seen. We have extraction protocols. Key personnel will be evacuated. Civilian losses are acceptable parameters. I shot him twice in the chest. Nolan was staring at me with something between horror and admiration. How many people are you planning to kill tonight? As many as it takes. I reloaded, watching Bridget Bishop's spirit solidify into something approaching physical form. But right now, our problem isn't the living. The dead woman looked at us with eyes like burning coals. You killed the one who sought to control us. This shows wisdom, but the ritual must be completed. Salem must burn as we burned. Will you stand with us or against us? Downtown Salem was a pillar of cold fire reaching toward the burning sky. At its base, Gallows Hill pulsed with supernatural energy as Silas Thorne continued his ritual. And walking through the streets between us and our destination, an army of the dead sought justice that would consume the living. We go to Gallows Hill, I said. We stop Thorne's ritual. And then I looked at my brother, historian, tour guide, the most decent person I knew, and tried to find words for what we were walking into. Then we learn if the dead can forgive the living. Field assessment, organization compromised at all levels. Salem supernatural event weaponized for military applications. Civilian population expendable. All federal authority hostile. Family protection now primary objective. Mission parameters. Reach Gallows Hill. Terminate Thorne's ritual. Prevent supernatural contamination spread. Estimated survival probability, 12%. But sometimes 12% is enough. End log. Automated system alert. Salem containment breach. Spectral manifestations. Critical mass achieved. Temporal displacement. Phase 4 imminent. Estimated time to total historical reversion, 47 minutes. Initiating orbital sterilization protocols. May God forgive us all. Emergency log. Classification. Posthumous record. Agent. Idris Chun. Field Investigator number 4471. Location. Salem, Massachusetts, Downtown Temporal Displacement Zone. Date. October 31st, 2024, 0:23 Eastern Standard Time. Assignment. Rogue Operation, Family Extraction. Status. Operating in historical overlay, reality compromised. Bridget Bishop walked with us toward downtown Salem. Not beside us, the dead don't walk the same paths as the living. She moved through walls, through trees, through the spaces between seconds. But her presence was constant. A cold weight in the air that made our breath steam despite the October warmth. The guilty hide at the hill where they murdered us, she said, her voice echoing from directions that didn't exist. But the path is guarded by their servants. What she meant became clear as we reached Federal Street. The modern road flickered like a dying fluorescent bulb, constantly shifting between asphalt and colonial-era dirt paths. But walking along both versions were figures in Puritan dress. The judges, ministers, and townspeople who had condemned the witches. They weren't spirits like Bridget. They were something worse. Living people pulled backward through time, their minds overwritten with 17th century memories and prejudices. I recognized some faces, Salem residents I'd interviewed during the investigation, now wearing severe black clothing and carrying torches that burned with the same cold fire as the runes. Witches. One of them hissed as we approached. His face belonged to the barista who'd served me coffee yesterday morning, but his eyes held centuries of religious fanaticism. Servants of darkness. They must burn. Nolan stepped protectively in front of me. These aren't real Puritans. They're modern people trapped in historical memories. Tell them that, I said, drawing my weapon as more transformed townspeople emerged from buildings that shifted between Starbucks and colonial shops. Right now, they believe it's 1692 and we're witches. The mob advanced with the methodical certainty of religious conviction. No reasoning with them. In their minds, we were servants of Satan who needed to be cleansed with fire. I put 3 rounds center mass in the lead figure. He staggered but didn't go down. The bullets had passed clean through him, leaving no wound. Whatever process was overriding their minds had also altered their physical forms. They're not fully alive anymore, Bridget observed with detached interest. Neither living nor dead. The ritual has made them transitional. Can they be killed? Everything can be destroyed, but these servants draw strength from the past. As long as Salem's history burns, they will endure. The mob reached us. I switched to hand-to-hand combat, using training that felt absurdly modern against opponents who moved with colonial-era awkwardness. But there were too many of them and they felt no pain. Hands grabbed for Nolan. I broke fingers, shattered wrists, crushed windpipes. None of it mattered. They kept coming with the relentless patience of absolute moral certainty. Then Bridget Bishop stepped between us and the mob. Her form solidified, becoming corporeal enough to interact with the physical world. The transformed townspeople stopped, recognition flickering in their overwritten minds. "You know me," she said to them. "I was the first to die for your fear. I died proclaiming my innocence while you watched and called it justice." The barista Puritan's face twisted with confusion. You were guilty. You practiced witchcraft. You consorted with the devil. I sold herbs and told fortunes. I owned property and spoke my mind. In your time, these were the crimes of witchcraft. Bridget's voice carried the weight of 3 centuries of injustice. But you know the truth now. You have lived beyond 1692. You have seen women vote, lead, choose their own paths. Which age was more wicked, mine or yours? The mob hesitated, caught between temporal memories and suppressed modern knowledge. Some began to weep. Others fell to their knees. A few simply faded, their forms becoming translucent as the historical overlay released its hold on them. But not all of them. "Lies," snarled a woman whose modern face I recognized as a Salem City Councilwoman. "Deceptions of the damned. The old ways were pure. The old judgments were just." She lunged at Nolan with fingers that had become claws, her form shifting into something that was neither colonial nor modern. A fusion of religious fanaticism and supernatural corruption. I put the barrel of my gun against her temple and pulled the trigger. This time she dropped. "Some choose to remain in the past," Bridget said sadly. "Even when offered truth." We fought our way through 3 more blocks of shifting temporal zones. Essex Street became a colonial marketplace where spectral vendors hawked wares to customers who had been dead for centuries. The House of Seven Gables flickered between its tourist attraction present and its darker historical incarnations. And everywhere, the dead walked among the living, not just Salem's executed witches. Every victim of injustice buried in the city's soil was rising. Murdered slaves, executed criminals, women who died in childbirth while their husbands remarried before the funeral. Salem's complete history of suffering was manifesting at once. "It's not sustainable," Nolan said as we took shelter in what had been a McDonald's but was now flickering between fast food and a colonial blacksmith shop. "This level of supernatural manifestation, it's consuming too much energy. The temporal overlay is destabilizing." He was right. The building around us was shifting more rapidly now, cycling through different historical periods every few seconds. 1692 Puritan settlement, 1790s federal architecture, 1850s industrial buildings, 1950s suburban development, present day. Thorne's ritual is pulling too much power from too many time periods, I realized. He's not just summoning Salem's dead. He's trying to summon all of Salem's history simultaneously. My secure phone buzzed with an incoming transmission. Not from the organization, the frequency was military. "Unknown operative, this is Colonel Martinez, U.S. Air Force Strategic Command. Salem has been designated a Class 5 supernatural contamination zone. Sterilization protocols will commence in T-37 minutes. Evacuate immediately." Sterilization protocols? Orbital kinetic bombardment. We're going to hit Salem with tungsten rods moving at Mach 10. Complete destruction of the contamination zone. I looked at Nolan. They're going to drop God's own sledgehammer on the city. Will that stop the supernatural manifestation? It'll stop everything. Every building, every person, every ghost. Salem will become a crater. Through the shifting walls, I could see Gallows Hill in the distance. The site of the original executions was now a pillar of cold fire reaching toward the burning sky. At its base, figures moved in ritual formation. Silas Thorne and his surviving cultists, maintaining the ceremony that was tearing Salem apart. We have 37 minutes to reach the hill and stop Thorne's ritual, I said. And if we can't, then Salem burns one last time. Bridget Bishop's spirit materialized beside us. The path to the hill is clear now. My sisters have dealt with the servants of the past. Through the windows, I could see other spectral figures, the executed witches of 1692, standing guard over a corridor of stable reality that led directly toward Gallows Hill. They had carved out a path through the temporal chaos. Why are you helping us? I asked. Because you chose truth over comfort. You killed the living to protect the innocent. This shows honor. Her form began to fade. But know this, the ritual cannot simply be stopped. It must be completed or redirected. The energy already summoned must go somewhere. What are you saying? Someone must die on Gallows Hill tonight. The only question is who chooses to make that sacrifice. The phone buzzed again. Colonel Martinez, T-minus 35 minutes. Orbital strike locked and loaded. God help us all. I grabbed Nolan's hand. Time to run. We sprinted through the corridor of stable reality, guided by the spirits of women who had died for the crime of being different. Behind us, Salem continued its temporal collapse. Ahead of us, Gallows Hill burned with the light of accumulated injustice. And somewhere in between, my brother and I ran toward a choice that would define not just our survival, but our souls. Field assessment, temporal displacement critical. Salem's complete historical trauma manifesting simultaneously. Orbital strike imminent. Path to Gallows Hill secured by executed witches. Thorne's ritual requires completion or redirection. Energy must be channeled into willing sacrifice. Estimated time to target, 12 minutes. Estimated time to orbital bombardment, 35 minutes. Estimated time to total temporal collapse, unknown. Family protection remains priority, but protection may require sacrifice. End log. Automated alert. Final warning. Temporal stability, 23% and falling. Spectral manifestations, beyond measurement. Historical overlay, complete saturation. Orbital strike authorization, confirmed. Salem will burn, as it always has, as it always must. Emergency log, classification, final testament. Agent, Idris Chun, Field Investigator number 4471. Location, Gallows Hill, Salem, Massachusetts. Date, October 31st, 2024, 0:47 Eastern Standard Time. Assignment, unauthorized operation, family protection. Status, critical losses, mission compromised. The path to Gallows Hill led through a graveyard of centuries. Every step took us past tombstones that aged and crumbled and reformed, marking graves that held the same bodies in different decades. The executed witches guided us in silence, their forms becoming more solid as we approached the site of their deaths. But we weren't alone on the path. Idris. Nolan's voice was tight with recognition. Those figures near the hill. I know them. I followed his gaze to a group of people in modern clothing standing at the base of Gallows Hill. They weren't transformed by temporal displacement. They were completely contemporary, carrying smartphones and wearing Salem Historical Society badges. Local historians, Nolan continued. My colleagues, what are they doing here? As we got closer, the answer became horrifyingly clear. They were part of Thorne's cult. Not recent converts, long-term members who had been researching Salem's occult history for decades, preparing for this night. The Historical Preservation Society, I realized. They weren't just studying Salem's witch trials. They were preparing to reverse them. Dr. Sarah Winters, the Society's head librarian, looked up as we approached. Her face showed the same cold certainty I'd seen in the organization's files on true believers. "Nolan Rivera," she said warmly, as if we were meeting at a conference instead of a supernatural ground zero. "I'm so glad you made it. Your family's connection to Salem's history makes you perfect for the final phase." "Sarah, what the hell is going on here?" "Justice, Nolan. 3 centuries overdue, but justice nonetheless." She gestured toward the ritual circle at the hill's peak, where Silas Thorne stood surrounded by blazing runes. "The executed witches will have their revenge. Salem will burn as they burned, and those who aided in the historical cover-up will face the same trials they helped perpetuate." "I never covered up anything. I'm a historian, not a judge." "You gave tours that called the witch trials a regrettable mistake. You wrote articles describing the executions as mass hysteria. You helped Salem profit from the murders of innocent women by turning their deaths into tourist attractions. I kept my weapon ready, but the cult members weren't paying attention to me. Their focus was entirely on Nolan, and I was beginning to understand why." "The Rivera family," Dr. Winters continued, "has been in Salem since 1688. Your ancestor, Miguel Rivera, served as an interpreter during the witch trials. He translated the confessions of accused witches who spoke only Spanish. 3 women died because of his translations." Nolan's face went pale. That's not possible. My family immigrated in the 1920s. "Your family has been covering up their connection to Salem for generations. But the dead remember. They know whose bloodline carries the guilt." Thorne's voice echoed across the hill, amplified by supernatural forces. "The ritual requires blood of the guilty, blood of those who aided in the executions, blood of those who profited from the cover-up, blood of those who made Salem forget its sins." I grabbed Nolan's arm. "We're leaving. Now." But Bridget Bishop's spirit materialized between us and the path down the hill. Her expression was sad but implacable. "The ritual cannot be stopped," she said. "Too much energy has been summoned. It must be completed with willing sacrifice, or Salem will tear itself apart across all timelines. Then let it tear itself apart. The destruction will spread. Boston, New York, every city with buried sins will face the same judgment. Millions will die as the dead rise to claim justice." My phone buzzed. "Colonel Martinez, T-18 minutes to orbital strike. Salem's supernatural contamination is spreading. Anomalous readings detected in Boston and Providence. Sterilization protocols may be insufficient." The temporal collapse was accelerating. Around us, Gallows Hill was cycling through its complete history. The colonial execution site, the empty field of the 1800s, the memorial park of the modern era. And in each time period, the dead were rising. "There has to be another way," I said. "There is," Nolan said quietly. "I can take my ancestors' place." "What?" "The guilt is inherited, right? Passed down through bloodlines. If I die willingly, accepting responsibility for Miguel Rivera's actions, it completes the justice cycle. The dead get their sacrifice, and the ritual can be controlled instead of continuing to spread." "Absolutely not. Idris, I've spent my whole life studying Salem's history. I know what happened here. I know the injustices, the cover-ups, the way the city turned murder into tourism. If my family contributed to that..." He looked at the spectral figures surrounding us. "Maybe it's time to balance the scales." Dr. Winters stepped forward. "The willing sacrifice must be made at the exact spot where the executions took place. The ritual circle will channel the energy into a controlled manifestation instead of chaotic destruction. And then what? The dead get their revenge and disappear. The dead get justice. Salem's sins are acknowledged. The historical record is corrected. The city survives, but it remembers." Thorne's chanting was reaching a crescendo. The runes covering Gallows Hill were pulsing so rapidly they looked like strobe lights. And descending from the burning sky, More supernatural entities were arriving. Not just Salem's dead, but the accumulated injustices of centuries. The choice must be made now, Bridget Bishop said. Willing sacrifice, or Salem burns completely. I looked at my brother, the historian who had dedicated his life to understanding the past, who had always believed that truth was more important than comfort. He was walking toward the ritual circle with the same quiet determination he'd shown when explaining Salem's history to tourists. Nolan, stop. I can't. This is what I've been studying my whole life without realizing it. The connection between past and present. The way history shapes the living. The price of inherited guilt. You're not guilty of anything. I'm guilty of turning tragedy into entertainment, of helping Salem profit from murder, of making people forget that real women died here for the crime of being different. He reached the edge of the ritual circle. At least this way, their deaths mean something. I raised my weapon, but I couldn't shoot. Not my brother. Not the last family I had left. Thorne smiled as Nolan stepped into the circle. The willing sacrifice of inherited guilt. The ritual is complete. The runes blazed with blinding light. Nolan screamed, not in pain, but in recognition. As the supernatural energy flowed through him, he was experiencing every moment of Salem's hidden history. Every trial, every execution, every cover-up. 3 centuries of accumulated trauma flowing through his consciousness. I see them, he gasped. I see all of them. The women who died, the men who killed them, the families who profited, the city that forgot. His eyes met mine across the ritual circle. I understand now. History isn't something you study. It's something you live. Something you pay for. The light consumed him. When it faded, Nolan was gone. Not dead, absorbed into Salem's history, becoming part of the city's collective memory. The executed witches were fading too, their need for justice finally satisfied. But the ritual wasn't over. The sacrifice balances the scales, Thorne said, his voice echoing with supernatural authority. But the power remains. Salem's dead are at peace, but Salem's history is now fully manifested. The city remembers everything. Around us, Gallows Hill was stabilizing, but not returning to its modern configuration. It was becoming a fusion of all its historical periods, a place where past and present existed simultaneously. The memorial to the executed witches was still there, but so were the original gallows. The colonial execution site was preserved forever, a wound in time that would never heal. What have you done? I asked. Created a monument to justice. Salem will never forget its sins again. The dead are at peace, but the living will carry the weight of memory. My phone buzzed. Colonel Martinez. Supernatural readings stabilizing. Orbital strike on hold. Whatever you did, it worked, but it didn't feel like victory. Felt like loss. Salem was saved, but at the cost of my brother's life. The city would survive, but it would never be the same. The past and present were forever intertwined, and every resident would carry the weight of inherited history. I holstered my weapon and walked away from Gallows Hill. Behind me, the ritual circle was dissolving, but the supernatural energy remained, not as chaotic destruction, but as living memory. Salem would remember, the dead would rest, and I would carry the knowledge that sometimes justice requires sacrifice, even when that sacrifice is your family. Field assessment, mission parameters, failed. Family protection, failed. Salem's survival, successful. Brother sacrifice to complete justice cycle. Supernatural threat contained through willing sacrifice of inherited guilt. Historical trauma resolved through acknowledgement rather than suppression. Salem stabilized but permanently altered. Past and present coexist. City becomes living memorial to historical injustice. Personal cost total. End log. Automated system alert. Salem stabilization. Temporal displacement. Controlled fusion.
Spectral manifestation, intégrated. Historical overlay, permanent installation.
Orbital strike. Cancelled. Salem remembers. Salem mourns. Salem endures. As do the guilty. As do the grieving. As do the living. Emergency log. Classification. Eyes only. Agent. Idris Chun. Field Investigator Number 4471. Location: beneath Salem Common Emergency Command Post. Date: October 31st, 2024, 1:15 Eastern Standard Time. Assignment: Conspiracy Investigation. Unauthorized. Status: Truth uncovered. Betrayal confirmed. The emergency bunker beneath Salem Common was supposed to be our fallback position. Organization protocol dictated that supernatural containment failures required immediate tactical withdrawal to hardened facilities. But as I descended the steel stairs, guided by the emergency lighting, I realized this wasn't a retreat. It was a trap. Colonel Martinez was waiting for me at the bottom, but he wasn't alone. 3 other organization officials sat around a conference table covered with files that had been sealed when I'd requested them just hours earlier. Behind them, a wall of monitors showed real-time feeds from Salem streets. The runic network pulsed like a heartbeat across the city, and I could see Thorne's cult members moving through the temporal overlays with practiced ease. "Agent Chun," Martinez said, "take a seat. We have a lot to discuss." "Sir, Salem is experiencing a Class 5 supernatural breach. We need immediate evacuation protocols and containment measures. Salem is experiencing exactly what we intended it to experience." The words hit me like a physical blow. I remained standing, my hand instinctively moving toward my sidearm. "I don't understand." "Of course you don't. You're a field agent, not a strategist. Your job is to gather intelligence and follow orders. But sometimes, agents in the field need to understand the bigger picture." Martinez gestured to the monitors. "Salem isn't our first supernatural containment failure. It's our most successful supernatural weapons test." One of the other officials, a woman I didn't recognize, opened a thick file. "Operation Historical Resonance. Initiated 1953. Objective: determine if sites of historical trauma can be weaponized through targeted supernatural manipulation. We've been conducting similar experiments for 70 years, Martinez continued. Gettysburg, Wounded Knee, Hiroshima, any location where significant emotional trauma has been embedded in the local environment can be activated under the right conditions. You're talking about turning graveyards into weapons. I'm talking about turning human suffering into tactical advantage. Every battlefield, every massacre site, every place where people died in agony, they all contain residual psychic energy. With the right catalyst, that energy can be directed. The woman slid a photograph across the table. It showed Silas Thorne, but he was wearing an organization badge. The date stamp was from 1987. Thorne has been our asset for over 30 years. His Historical Preservation Society has been identifying and preparing supernatural hotspots across New England. The cult was our creation, Agent Chun. Every member has been vetted and recruited by organization personnel. That's impossible. Thorne killed civilians. He's summoning hostile supernatural entities. He's field testing controlled supernatural manifestation protocols. The civilian casualties were acceptable losses in a weapons development program that could revolutionize modern warfare. My phone buzzed. A text from Fenric. Emergency bunker compromised. Organization lying. Salem is trapped for field agents who ask too many questions. Get out now. I kept my expression neutral while reading the message. Sir, what about the orbital strike? The supernatural contamination spreading to other cities. There is no orbital strike. The contamination is contained exactly where we want it. Salem is serving as a controlled testing environment for supernatural weapons deployment. And the dead? The executed witches, perfect test subjects. Historical trauma combined with documented injustice creates incredibly powerful supernatural entities. We've been studying their manifestation patterns for decades. Another monitor showed Gallows Hill, where Nolan had died. But the camera angle was wrong, too perfect, too professional. This wasn't emergency surveillance footage. This was prepositioned documentation equipment. You've been recording everything, every supernatural manifestation, every temporal displacement, every spectral interaction. Salem is providing us with the most comprehensive dataset on weaponized historical trauma ever compiled. My brother died for your weapons test. Your brother died because he interfered with a classified operation, just like every other civilian casualty in Salem tonight. Martinez leaned forward. The question now is whether you're going to follow orders or join the casualty list. I looked at the monitors again. Salem's streets were still glowing with runic energy, but now I could see the truth. Organization vehicles were positioned at strategic locations around the city. Personnel in hazmat suits were collecting samples from the supernatural manifestations. Mobile laboratories were analyzing the spectral entities. This wasn't containment. This was harvesting. How long have you been planning this? Salem specifically? 20 years. We've been feeding information to Thorne's cult, helping them identify the most powerful ritual sites, providing them with occult knowledge that would take decades to discover independently. And Fenric, Agent Morrison, has been compromised. He's developed an emotional attachment to the supernatural entities and is no longer following orders. He's been designated for termination. The truth was worse than I'd imagined. The organization hadn't just failed to prevent Salem's supernatural catastrophe, they'd orchestrated it. My brother hadn't died to save the city. He died to provide data for weapons development. What about the other cities? The spreading contamination? There is no spreading contamination. That was misinformation to justify the orbital strike cover story. Salem's supernatural activity is completely contained within the city limits. But the temporal displacement is exactly what we wanted. Salem now exists in a state of controlled supernatural overlay. Past and present coexist, providing us with access to historical trauma across multiple time periods. We can study the witch trials as if they were happening in real time. My phone buzzed again. Fenric, Bunker has kill switch. They're going to eliminate everyone who knows the truth. Salem isn't a weapons test, it's a cover-up. Organization has been killing supernatural witnesses for decades. I stood up slowly. I need to process this information. Request permission to return to the surface and continue field observations. Request denied. You're staying here until Salem's supernatural activity returns to baseline levels. For your own safety, of course. Of course. But as I looked around the bunker, I realized the truth. The emergency command post wasn't just a fallback position or a monitoring station. It was a tomb. The organization had no intention of letting anyone who'd witnessed Salem's supernatural manifestation leave alive. The walls were lined with what I'd initially thought were communication arrays, but now I recognized them as weapons. Directed energy systems designed to eliminate personnel cleanly and efficiently. The conference table was positioned directly in the center of the targeting grid. Agent Chun, Martinez said, I need you to surrender your weapon and communication devices. Standard protocol for supernatural contamination exposure. I unholstered my sidearm and placed it on the table. But as I did, I palmed the emergency beacon from my tactical vest. If I was going to die, I'd at least try to get word to someone outside the organization. Your phone as well. I handed over my phone, but kept the beacon concealed. Sir, I have one more question. What? If Salem was a controlled test, why did you need field agents at all? Why not just use your cult assets? Martinez smiled. Because we needed documentation from credible witnesses. Field agents with clean records and no prior knowledge of the operation. Your reports will be crucial for demonstrating that Salem's supernatural activity was an unexpected emergent threat that required immediate weapons development. You're going to use my reports to justify the weapons program. We're going to use your reports to secure funding for expanded supernatural weapons development. Salem will be the proof of concept for Operation Historical Resonance Phase 2, which is simultaneous activation of supernatural weapons at strategic locations worldwide. Every site of historical trauma becomes a potential battlefield advantage. The emergency beacon was warm in my palm. I pressed the activation sequence and hoped someone outside the organization would receive the signal. "Agent Chun," the woman said, "you're sweating. Are you feeling all right?" "Just processing the scope of the operation, ma'am." "Good, because you're going to help us write the after-action report." Salem was a terrorist attack using stolen occult knowledge. The organization heroically contained the threat, but not before suffering significant casualties. You're one of the few survivors, and everyone who actually survived will be listed as missing, presumed dead. Clean narrative, no loose ends. The monitors showed Salem stabilizing, but not returning to normal. The supernatural overlay was becoming permanent, just as they'd intended. The city would serve as a living laboratory for supernatural weapons development. My phone, now in Martinez's possession, buzzed with an incoming call. The caller ID showed Fenrich's number. Martinez answered. "Agent Morrison, you're out of position." Fenrich's voice was distorted by supernatural interference, but clear enough. "Salem remembers. Martinez, the dead know what you've done. They know about the other cities. They know about the weapons program. The supernatural entities are contained within Salem's borders. The entities are contained. The truth isn't. Salem's supernatural overlay has created a connection to every site of historical trauma worldwide. The dead are talking to each other, sharing information across time and space." Martinez's face went pale. "That's impossible." The witch trials weren't just about Salem. They were part of a global pattern of persecution. Now that Salem's dead have been awakened, they're awakening their sisters worldwide. Your weapons program just created the largest supernatural intelligence network in human history. The monitors suddenly showed activity beyond Salem's borders. Supernatural readings were spiking in dozens of locations across the globe. Historical trauma sites were activating spontaneously. "Phase 2 is beginning," Fenrich continued, "but not under your control. The dead are taking their justice worldwide, and they know exactly who's been profiting from their suffering." Martinez cut the connection and turned to me. "Agent Chun, it appears your partner has been fully compromised by supernatural influence. Or maybe he's the only one still thinking clearly." "I'm sorry you feel that way." Martinez reached for his sidearm, but I was already moving. The emergency beacon had done its job. Salem's supernatural entities now knew the truth about the organization's weapons program, and they were very, very angry. The bunker's lights flickered as supernatural energy began penetrating the hardened facility. On the monitors, I could see spectral figures manifesting throughout Salem, but they weren't random appearances. They were coordinated, organized. The dead were coming for their tormentors, and this time they knew exactly who to blame. Field assessment, truth revealed. Organization orchestrated Salem's supernatural manifestation as weapons test. Civilian casualties intentional. Supernatural entities now aware of global conspiracy. Worldwide supernatural activation beginning. Personal mission, expose conspiracy. Survive bunker elimination attempt. Warn global supernatural community. Salem remembers. The dead communicate. Justice spreads. End log. Automated system alert. Global supernatural activation. Historical trauma sites. Worldwide awakening. Supernatural network. Active communication. Organization assets. Compromised. The dead know the truth. The dead share the truth. The dead demand justice. Emergency log. Classification. Posthumous testimony. Agent Idris Chun, Field Investigator number 4471. Location, Salem Common, surface level. Date, October 31st, 2024, 1:47 Eastern Standard Time. Assignment, Rogue Operation Truth Exposure. Status, Final Confrontation, Organization hostile. The emergency bunker's kill switch activated 30 seconds after the global supernatural network went online. I barely made it to the surface before the directed energy weapons turned the command post into a tomb. Martinez and his conspirators died instantly, but their deaths solved nothing. The organization's weapons program was bigger than Salem, bigger than any single cell of operatives. Salem Common was a battlefield when I emerged. Organization strike teams were fighting a losing battle against manifestations from every historical trauma site worldwide. The dead weren't just seeking justice for Salem's witch trials. They were settling accounts that stretched back centuries. Fenric was waiting for me near the memorial statue, his organization badge discarded on the ground. Behind him, Bridget Bishop's spectral form flickered between her trial appearance and her execution. She was no longer bound to Salem's history. She was connected to every woman who died for the crime of being different. The bunker, Fenric asked, eliminated. Martinez and his team are dead. Good, but there are others. The weapons program has cells in every major city. Around us, Salem's supernatural overlay was stabilizing into something new. The past and present hadn't just merged. They'd created a third timeline where the dead could act as judges of the living. Spectral tribunals were materializing throughout the city, putting organization assets on trial for their crimes. Idris, Fenric said, there's something you need to understand. The weapons program isn't just about Salem. The organization has been feeding supernatural energy into a global network for decades. Every site they've activated, every trauma they've weaponized, it's all connected. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Agent Chun. This is Director Hawthorne, Organization Central Command. Salem operation is compromised. Immediate extraction authorized. Helicopter inbound to Common, ETA 3 minutes. They're still trying to extract their assets. I said, let them come. The dead are ready. But as I looked around Salem Common, I realized the supernatural entities weren't just seeking justice for historical crimes. They were preparing for war. The witch trials had been a test case, a way to identify and target anyone who profited from systematic persecution. Now they had a complete database of every organization operative, every government official, every corporate executive who'd participated in the weapons program. Fenric, what happens when they finish with the organization? What do you mean? The dead don't just want justice for supernatural crimes. They want justice for everything. Every historical trauma, every systematic persecution, every injustice that created the psychic energy the organization harvested. The sound of rotor blades echoed across Salem Common. The extraction helicopter was approaching, but it wasn't alone. Military aircraft were converging on Salem from multiple directions. The organization wasn't just trying to extract their assets. They were trying to contain the supernatural network by destroying its source. Incoming airstrike, Fenric said. They're going to level Salem. Will that stop the supernatural network? No, but it will kill every witness to the weapons program. The helicopter touched down 50 meters away. Organization operatives in full tactical gear deployed, weapons raised. Their leader was shouting orders through a megaphone. All personnel, immediate extraction. Salem is designated for sterilization in T-4 minutes. I looked at Fenric. We can't let them destroy the evidence. What evidence? Salem is the evidence. The city itself is proof of what the organization has done. But if Salem is destroyed, who's going to believe the supernatural network exists? Who's going to investigate the other sites? Bridget Bishop's spectral form solidified. The dead will remember. The dead will testify. The dead will ensure justice. But the living won't listen to the dead. They never have. The organization operatives were advancing across Salem Common, moving in tactical formation. Behind them, the extraction helicopter was powering up for immediate departure. In the distance, I could see the contrails of incoming missiles. Agent Chun, the team leader, was calling through his megaphone. Agent Morrison, immediate extraction required. I made my choice. I activated my phone's emergency broadcast system, a feature designed to send critical intelligence to every organization communication network simultaneously. But instead of sending classified information to organization channels, I sent it to every news outlet, every social media platform, every government watchdog organization in the global database. The message was simple: Salem, Massachusetts, October 31st, 2024. Organization weapons program using historical trauma sites for supernatural warfare. Civilian casualties intentional. Global supernatural network active. Sterilization imminent. Coordinates: 42.5195 degrees north, 70.8967 degrees west. What did you do? Fenric asked. I made sure the world knows what happened here. The organization operatives reached our position. Their leader, a colonel I didn't recognize, was shouting orders. Agents Chan and Morrison, you're under arrest for treason and conspiracy. Salem operation is classified above your clearance level. Salem operation is a war crime, I replied. Salem operation is national security. Bridget Bishop stepped forward. Her spectral form was now fully solid, and she was carrying the ghostly outline of a flintlock pistol, the weapon used to execute her 3 centuries ago. Colonel Richards, she said, somehow knowing his name, you authorized the harvesting of psychic energy from 17 historical trauma sites. You personally profited from the suffering of 2,847 documented victims of systematic persecution. I don't negotiate with hallucinations. You will answer for your crimes. The colonel raised his weapon, but before he could fire, Salem's supernatural overlay shifted. Suddenly, we weren't standing in Salem Common in 2024. We were standing in Salem Village in 1692, and the colonial courthouse was materializing around us. The dead were putting the organization on trial. Spectral figures filled the courthouse. Not just Salem's executed witches, but victims from every historical trauma site the organization had weaponized. Indigenous people from Wounded Knee, civilians from Hiroshima, Holocaust victims from concentration camps, enslaved people from plantation sites, generations of the systematically persecuted, all connected through the supernatural network. The trial begins, Bridget Bishop announced. The charges: conspiracy to profit from historical trauma, systematic weaponization of human suffering, and premeditated murder of supernatural witnesses. Colonel Richards and his operatives were frozen in place by supernatural force. Around them, the ghostly courthouse filled with spectral judges and jury members. This wasn't just Salem's justice. This was justice for every atrocity the organization had turned into a weapon. Agent Chen, Bridget Bishop said, you have testified truthfully about the organization's crimes. You may speak for the living. I looked at the colonel, then at the assembled dead. The organization convinced themselves they were protecting national security, but they were just repeating the same pattern, turning human suffering into power, justifying atrocity as necessity. And what justice do you seek? Truth. Let the world know what happened here. Let the living learn from the dead. The spectral jury deliberated in whispers that sounded like wind through cemetery trees. When they reached their verdict, Bridget Bishop stood to deliver it. The organization is guilty of crimes against the living and the dead. The punishment is exposure. Every secret revealed, every lie uncovered, every victim acknowledged. The supernatural overlay shifted again. We were back in Salem Common, but now every organization operative was surrounded by ghostly documentation. Spectral files showing their crimes, supernatural evidence of their guilt. The dead were creating an indestructible record of the weapons program. The extraction helicopter is leaving, Fenric said. I looked up. The organization aircraft were departing, but not because their mission was complete. They were fleeing because their entire communication network was being flooded with supernatural testimony. Every phone, every computer, every classified database was receiving evidence of the weapons program from the dead themselves. The missiles, recalled. Hard to justify destroying Salem when the entire world is watching. My phone was buzzing with incoming calls. News organizations, government investigators, international human rights groups, all demanding information about the Salem incident. The supernatural network had done more than seek justice for historical crimes. It had created global transparency about systematic persecution. What happens now? I asked. Now the living decide whether to learn from the dead or repeat their mistakes. Around us, Salem's supernatural overlay was stabilizing into something unprecedented. A city where past and present coexisted, where the dead could testify about historical injustices, where truth couldn't be buried or classified. The organization's weapons program was exposed, but the supernatural network remained active. Every site of historical trauma worldwide was now connected, creating a global early warning system against systematic persecution. Fenric, what about the other organization cells? They're facing the same supernatural tribunals. The dead are very thorough. As dawn broke over Salem, I realized the final confrontation hadn't been between the living and the dead. It had been between those who profited from suffering and those who sought justice for it. The supernatural network had ensured that truth would always be stronger than classification, that the dead would always outnumber the living, and that historical trauma would never again be weaponized without consequence. Salem remembered. The world watched. The dead testified, and for the first time in centuries, justice was served without requiring more sacrifice. Field assessment, organization weapons program exposed through supernatural testimony. Global supernatural network operational. Historical trauma sites worldwide connected. Systematic persecution now monitored by the dead. Personal mission completed. Truth revealed. Justice served. World changed. Salem endures. The dead protect the living. History becomes witness. End log. Automated system alert. Global supernatural network. Historical trauma sites. Connected and monitored. Supernatural testimony. Broadcast worldwide. Organization assets. Exposed and prosecuted. The dead have spoken. The living have heard. Justice flows from Salem to the world. Personal log. Classification. Unclassified. Former agent. Idris Chan. Independent investigator. Location. Salem Memorial District, Massachusetts. Date. November 1st, 2025, 1 year later. Status. Witness to the new world. The tourists still come to Salem, but they're different now. They arrive with flowers instead of cameras, with questions instead of selfie sticks. The city that once turned tragedy into entertainment has become something unprecedented. A place where the dead can speak for themselves. I'm writing this from the Salem Memorial District, what used to be called Salem Common before the supernatural overlay became permanent. The benches here are occupied by both the living and the dead, though most visitors have learned to tell the difference. The executed witches appear solid between 9 a.m. and 3 p.m., offering testimony about their trials to anyone willing to listen. Bridget Bishop holds court near the memorial statue, answering questions about systematic persecution that historians have debated for centuries. But Salem's dead aren't the only ones who speak here now. The supernatural network that began with Salem's witch trials has expanded beyond anything the organization could have imagined. Every morning, spectral figures from historical trauma sites worldwide manifest in Salem's Memorial District. Today, I've seen survivors from Wounded Knee, Hiroshima, Auschwitz, and dozens of other sites. They come to testify, to share their stories, to ensure that the living understand the true cost of systematic persecution. The organization doesn't exist anymore. The supernatural tribunals that began in Salem spread to every major city, exposing classified programs that had operated for decades. Directors, operatives, and government officials faced ghostly testimony about their crimes. Some were prosecuted by living courts. Others simply disappeared, unable to live with the weight of supernatural accountability. Fenric runs the Salem Historical Truth Center now, a research facility that documents supernatural testimony from around the world. He's changed since that night, older, more careful, but also more hopeful. He believes Salem has become something unique, a place where historical trauma can heal instead of festering. The dead don't want revenge, he told me yesterday. They want acknowledgement. They want the living to understand what happened and why it can't happen again. But I'm not sure the living are ready for that kind of truth. The global response to Salem's supernatural network has been complicated. Some countries have embraced supernatural testimony as a form of historical documentation. Others have tried to suppress it, claiming national security concerns. A few have attempted to weaponize it, creating new versions of the organization's research programs. They don't understand that the dead are watching now. Every attempt to exploit supernatural phenomena triggers immediate manifestations from the global network. The persecuted communicate across time and space, sharing information about systematic oppression faster than any government can classify it. Last month, a corporate executive in Tokyo tried to establish a supernatural research division based on leaked organization documents. Within hours, spectral figures from every site of industrial disaster worldwide were manifesting in his office building. The project was abandoned after employees reported that the dead were providing detailed testimony about corporate negligence dating back to the Industrial Revolution. The world has learned a simple truth. The dead outnumber the living, and they have very long memories. Salem has become the unofficial capital of this new reality. The city council, which now includes 3 elected representatives from the supernatural community, has established protocols for managing the constant stream of spectral testimony. The Memorial District operates like a living museum, where visitors can interact directly with historical figures who experienced systematic persecution. But it's not just a tourist destination anymore. Salem has become a pilgrimage site for anyone seeking justice for historical trauma. Families of victims travel here to hear their ancestors' testimonies. Researchers come to gather first-hand accounts of events that were previously documented only through the perspectives of the persecutors. And sometimes the dead provide warnings about the present. 3 weeks ago, Bridget Bishop interrupted her daily testimony to announce that a new systematic persecution was beginning in a small town in Montana. Local officials were using zoning laws to force out indigenous families, claiming public safety concerns. Within hours, spectral figures from broken treaties and forced relocations were manifesting in the town hall, providing testimony about the historical pattern of displacement. The persecution stopped before it could escalate. The dead had prevented history from repeating itself. This is what the organization never understood about their weapons program. They thought they could harvest supernatural energy while controlling supernatural consciousness. They believed they could profit from historical trauma without acknowledging historical injustice. They assumed the dead would remain silent about systematic persecution. They were wrong about everything. The supernatural network isn't a weapon. It's a witness. Every site of historical trauma is now connected, creating a global early warning system against systematic oppression. The dead monitor the living not for revenge, but for prevention. Salem was just the beginning. I still work as an investigator, but my job has changed. Instead of investigating supernatural anomalies, I investigate why supernatural manifestations occur. Every spectral appearance is a message. Every ghostly testimony is a warning. The dead don't manifest randomly. They appear when historical patterns are repeating, when the living are forgetting the lessons of the past. My latest case took me to a detention center in Arizona, where spectral figures from Japanese internment camps were manifesting in the administrative offices. The dead were providing testimony about the historical pattern of imprisoning targeted populations under the guise of national security. The facility was closed after supernatural documentation showed that current policies were identical to those used during systematic persecution campaigns. The dead had prevented another historical tragedy by ensuring the living couldn't ignore historical precedent. But my work isn't just about preventing systematic persecution. It's about understanding what Salem has become and what it means for the future. Salem's supernatural overlay has created something unprecedented. A place where historical trauma can heal instead of festering. The executed witches aren't trapped in their past anymore. They're actively working to prevent similar injustices. The city that once profited from their deaths now serves as a platform for their testimonies. The dead have become teachers, and the living are finally learning to listen. Every day, I walk through Salem's Memorial District and watch tourists, researchers, and pilgrims interacting with spectral figures from across history. Children ask questions about persecution and injustice that their parents struggled to explain. Historians gather first-hand accounts that challenge official narratives. Activists receive guidance from predecessors who fought similar battles. Salem has become a place where the past and present collaborate instead of conflicting. But I know this is just the beginning. The supernatural network continues to expand, connecting new sites of historical trauma every month. The dead are patient. They've waited centuries for the living to acknowledge their suffering, and they're willing to wait longer if necessary. What they won't tolerate is forgetting. Last night, I received a call from a colleague in Berlin. Spectral figures from Holocaust sites were manifesting in government buildings, providing testimony about the historical pattern of dehumanizing targeted populations. The dead were warning about new legislation that echoed the language of systematic persecution. The supernatural network was preventing history from repeating itself on a global scale. As I finish writing this log, I can see Bridget Bishop near the memorial statue, speaking with a group of students about the witch trials. Her testimony is no longer about seeking justice for past wrongs. It's about preventing future ones. She's explaining how systematic persecution begins with small acts of othering, how communities become complicit in injustice, how the living can recognize the warning signs that the dead have learned to identify. The students are listening with the kind of attention that comes from understanding that they're receiving first-hand testimony from someone who experienced systematic persecution. They're learning history not from textbooks, but from the people who lived it. This is Salem's gift to the world. The dead as teachers, history as warning, justice as prevention. The organization thought they could weaponize historical trauma. Instead, they created a global network of supernatural witnesses who ensure that historical trauma can never again be exploited, ignored, or forgotten. Salem remembers. The world listens. The dead protect the living. And in a city where the past and present coexist, justice is no longer about revenge. It's about making sure that systematic persecution never happens again. My phone is buzzing with another call. Another supernatural manifestation, another warning from the dead, another opportunity to prevent history from repeating itself. The work continues. The dead are patient. The living are learning. Salem endures, and the world is changing. Personal assessment. Salem's supernatural overlay has created global network of historical witnesses. The dead actively prevent systematic persecution through supernatural testimony. World learning to listen to voices of the persecuted. Personal mission. Evolved from investigation to prevention. Working with supernatural network to identify and stop systematic persecution before it escalates. Salem serves as living memorial and active warning system. Historical trauma becomes teacher instead of weapon. Justice achieved through prevention rather than punishment. End log. Salem Memorial District. Daily testimony schedule. 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. Witch trial victims. Historical context. 12 p.m. to 3 p.m. Global persecution witnesses. Pattern recognition. 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. Contemporary warnings. Prevention guidance. 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. Community dialogue. Living and dead. Current global supernatural network status. Active sites. 1,247 historical trauma locations worldwide. Daily testimonies. 3,000 plus spectral witnesses. Prevention successes. 89 systematic persecution attempts stopped. Historical clarifications. 12,000 plus documented corrections to official narratives. The dead remember. The living learn. History teaches. Justice prevents. Salem endures.